Welcome to Mindful Chatting, especially my private practice friends. Can I confess something to you? When I first started supervising, I kind of dreaded writing my supervision notes, which I'm sure any supervisor out there kind of feels me when it comes to that part. And it's not because I didn't really enjoy supervision. I absolutely loved supervising. I love helping clinicians think through cases, watching their confidence grow, and seeing those kind of light bulb moments when something finally clicks for them. What I dreaded was everything that absolutely came after that. I'd finish an amazing supervision meeting. I'd sit down at my computer, stare at my blank note, and think, how do I summarize all of that? I'd spend way too much time trying to remember exactly what we discussed. I'd rewrite the same clinical language over and over again, and I'd search through old notes because I knew I'd already written something similar to that. And I convinced myself that documentation was just supposed to take forever. But eventually I realized something. I didn't have a documentation problem, I had a systems problem. And today I want to show you the documentation workflow I use now that saves me hours every month. It keeps my documentation consistent and it makes it much easier to protect both my supervisees and my license at the end of the day. But don't worry, we're going to talk about this and unpack it together.
Welcome to Mindful Chatting, a podcast where therapy meets real life. I'm Kristen, a therapist, business owner, and a lifelong student of what it means to fully show up in our relationships, in our work, and in our healing. Here, we unpacked mental health concepts, explore mindfulness tools, and talk through the messy, beautiful, in-between moments that shape us. Whether you're a fellow clinician, a curious listener, or someone navigating your own growth, this space is for you. Let's chat.
Why does documentation feel so mentally exhausting for us clinicians? And it's usually not because writing notes is difficult. It's mostly because our brain is making a dozen of tiny decisions every single time you sit down to write the note. Let's think about this. Every supervision session, you're asking yourself, should I start this note? What order should I write this in? What exactly did we discuss? Did we talk about ethics first or interventions first? Should I include the consultation point? How should I word this recommendation? Those may seem like little decisions when we think about them, but every single one requires a lot of mental energy. And this is why we call this decision fatigue. As therapists, we're already spending all day making clinical decisions, regulating our emotions, holding space, switching between our clients, and then also thinking very critically. By the time we get to our documentation, though, our executive functioning is often running on our fumes. And if you have ADHD like me, and you're simply mentally exhausted after a full day of seeing clients, those repeated decisions become even more taxing for your brain. The goal isn't to become better at remembering everything. The goal is actually to build a system so you don't have to. Documentation isn't exhausting because it's hard. It's exhausting because most clinicians recreate it from scratch every single time. So over the years, I've kind of simplified my documentation into 4 parts that we're going to go over today. And it's not because I wanted shortcuts, but because I wanted consistency for myself. So let's go over each of these 4 parts. Step 1 is I need you to standardize your structure. Every supervision note that I have follows the exact same outline and structure. I don't reinvent the format every single week. Mine include sections such as the cases we discussed, the themes that were identified, clinical skills that maybe I demonstrated or my supervisee has demonstrated within their sessions, any ethical or legal considerations that came up, interventions or consultations that were provided, any recommendations that I gave my supervisee, and any follow-up items for the supervisee or for myself. Having this consistent structure means that I'm focusing on my clinical thinking and not trying to remember what comes next. And what I think is very interesting that we don't necessarily do for our supervision notes that probably need to be part of our structure is that part of your supervision note needs to have all of these things outlined, even if they weren't necessarily discussed. So if you guys found that there was no ethical or legal decisions discussed, you still need to reference it in your supervision note to recognize that it was discussed or it was discussed and that it wasn't needed. So some of the maybe sentence stems that I'll use was ethical and legal considerations include or do not included in this case, so that it was at least addressed within that supervision session. Step 2 is I want you to start building some templates for yourself about this repeated language. So, one thing graduate school never taught me, and I'm sure it didn't teach you either, is that you do not need to rewrite the same idea over and over again. Certain things are going to come up repeatedly for your supervision sessions, such as like boundary work or countertransference, maybe documentation improvement, maybe about a risk assessment or clinical conceptualization, maybe professional identity development. You need to kind of create a template language for these reoccurring things that may happen. You're not copying and pasting without thinking, though. You're creating a foundation that you can personalize each session. Templates kind of improve this consistency, and then consistency improves the quality. If you know that you have all of these things written up for you to kind of reference and come back to within the note, even if you're writing it co-occurring within the session, you don't have to think about what goes next in the note. It's kind of already templated for you so that you can actually be truly present within your supervision session.
For any clinicians tuning in, if insurance billing is the part of your practice that drains your soul, Headway will be your best friend. They get you credentialed, send you referrals, manage your billing, submit your claims, all the stuff none of us went to grad school for. It's free to join, and honestly, it's been a huge support for therapists who want to take insurance without drowning in the administration part. My link is in the show notes if you want to check it out.
Now let's talk about step 3. Step 3 is to document close to what you're doing within the conversation of your supervision meeting. So, one of the biggest mistakes I see clinicians make is waiting until the end of the day, or worse, end of the week, to complete your documentation. The longer you wait, the harder your brain has to work to conjure up what you actually talked about. I try to document as close to supervision as possible while the conversation is still fresh in my mind. Not because my memory is bad, because I don't want to rely on my memory in the first place. Your system should support your brain, not expect your brain to support the system. So, some of the things I do, if I have a Zoom meeting where I'm doing supervision, I'm going to have the Zoom meeting on one side, and then I'm going to have my documentation on the other. I may not necessarily be writing word for word what I'm doing, but I'm definitely bullet pointing as I'm going through the session what we're talking about, so that when I go back, my memory is refreshed, or what I'm doing is kind of just cleaning up the note. I may be using a lot of those sentence stems that I'm talking about to maybe cleaning it up and making it look a little bit more flowing. And I'm also using that documentation to make sure that I'm addressing all of those outlined things that were in step 1 throughout my supervision session. If I'm doing a supervision session in person, I'm going to be taking notes. So that can look like a bunch of different things for everybody. But right now, I use my iPad and my Apple Pencil, and I kind of just pull out a note or a blank document and I start writing in it. Again, I'm probably bulleting more than actually writing complete sentences, so that all of this support my memory when I go back to make the supervision note later as I'm typing it up, so that I know what I talked about and I'm not forgetting anything. And then step 4 is let's make your future you life a lot more easier for yourself. And this is where I think that this is the biggest step that people overlook, is how easy it is to find your documentation months from now. Do you have naming convention, consistent folders, searchable files? Could another supervisor step into your system and understand it? every document should be easy to locate, and your future you will thank you and thank your present you while you're doing it. So this is really interesting because I don't think a lot of supervisors, we have this idea that maybe our supervision notes will be used, but we don't recognize how important they are when we actually need them. And I'm going to give you an example. So I had taken on a supervisee that was being supervised prior to me by another supervisor. And unfortunately, this particular supervisee had a board complaint. Now, you would think, well, that has nothing to do with me because I'm her current supervisor. All they're going to do is really audit the prior supervisor and prior supervisee's notes. That's not true. The board can do kind of whatever they want. And so for this particular situation, the board asked for basically that supervisee's personnel file within me and all of the supervision notes at that time. At that point, we had 6 months worth of supervision notes, and I needed to have every single one filled out. And you bet that I had all of them located in the same folder. And I do this kind of consistent naming of files. So I'll do the initials of the supervisee. I'll put clinical supervision so I know what that is, and then I put the date of the supervision in it. And one of the things that I'm going to share with you is kind of my blank templated note that I use for my clinical supervision so that every single note is the same, but I'm just personalizing it for whatever that session is. You also want to make sure that your supervisee is signing off on all of your supervision notes along with yourself. Now, every board might be different, and so you might have to look at what the guidelines are, but this is kind of my rule of thumb is I always do a wet ink or a Adobe signing way to kind of establish when this person clinically or electronically signed on that note. Now, for certain insurance companies and managed care, a lot of these supervision notes need to be done and signed off within 24 hours of the supervision meeting. Not every board has those stipulations, but I definitely try to do it in regards to the board auditing every 30 days. So usually especially with our board, we have to have supervision meetings every 2 weeks. So every week or every other week, I'm trying to get that signature. But you bet that I'm writing that supervision note within 24 hours. So that's just something I want you to think about when you're creating these consistency with these folders and how you're saving your documentation to help yourself later. I think one of the biggest mindset shifts I had was realizing that writing every note from scratch didn't make me a better supervisor. It just made me a more exhausted one. And I used to think that templates somehow made documentation less thoughtful, but I found the opposite. Once I stopped wasting energy on formatting and wording, and I had more mental space to think deeply about the clinical work itself, that's where my attention belongs. Not reinventing the wheel every Friday afternoon during my supervision and documentation.
Here's a quick note for my clinicians listening. If you're looking for a charting and practice management system that doesn't make you want to scream, well, guess what? I use TherapyNotes. It's clean, reliable, HIPAA compliant, and honestly saves me hours every week. You can try it with my link in the show notes.
I think when people hear documentation, they immediately think board complaints, audits, liability. And yes, documentation absolutely protects you legally for those things, but it also protects something else, your thinking, your continuity, your growth as a supervisor, your supervisee's development. When your documentation is organized, you're able to look back and see patterns. You notice growth, you recognize reoccurring themes within your supervisees, you identify areas that still need support, and then your documentation becomes more than just paperwork for you. It becomes clinical data that you can reference in real time. So this week, I want to challenge you to identify one thing that you repeatedly recreate within your supervision. And maybe that's a supervision note, maybe that's an informed consent email, a consultation summary, a treatment recommendation, whatever it is. Build one template or sentence stem off of that. just one, and you'll be surprised how much mental energy you get back when you recreate that. And here's what I hope you remember from today's episode. Good documentation isn't about having a better memory. It's about building a better system for you. The more repeatable your workflow becomes, the more mental energy you have for what actually matters for you, which is your clients and your supervisees, and the clinical work that you absolutely love. Because documentation should support your practice, not slow it down. And if you're interested, I'll put a link in the show notes if you're wanting to look at that supervision template note that I personally use during my supervision meetings to help cast you off. And I want to thank you for joining me. And as always, be gentle with your mind.
One more thing before you go, and this helps me personally, staying present and grounded, which we all need, especially when your brain wants to spiral into disconnection. Me too. It's Brain FM. It's musically designed to help ADHD brains, well, really anyone's brain, focus, relax, or sleep, and I use it almost daily. If you want to try it, I've dropped my link in the show notes. And if you're looking for planning tools or ADHD-friendly resources, I'll keep a list of my favorite links in every episode.